Good morning, everyone. We're on Kufim Dalet Amud Bet. 5 lines into the wide lines. Tinan Hatam. There was a Mishnah in Mikvaot. It says, Nafal tocho yayin o chometz umochal v'shina marav pasul. If wine or vinegar or mochal is like a watery, sweaty substance that emerges from the olives at the time of their pressing stages. When they produce the olives and they produce the olive oil, there's different stages where the olives produce some sort of watery substance, and that's called mochal. So that falls into a mikveh has a little bit of a different color and discolors it, the shinam arav, and it changes the color of the mikveh pasul. So the Gemara says, Man tana de mochal mashka. Who says that mochal is a mashka? Meaning, the Gemara now feels, mashka, that the only way to ruin a mikveh, like the first shitot of yesterday of Nachman, is if it's it's really a different substance. Something that's not called a different liquid, a real liquid. So that is not water, and therefore we consider it significant. But if it's just, it doesn't have a real halachic status as mashke, as one of the mashkim, then it's insignificant, and even if it discolors the water, we know that you're going into real water. Water with what? Water with nothing, really. Not a significant addition. And therefore it doesn't ruin the mikveh, even if it discolors the mikveh. So therefore, the Gemara feels at this point that all these things have to have a halacha of mashke. So yayin, we understand. Chometz, we understand. But mochal, who says that it's mashke? Amar Abai Rabbi Yaakov Yidetanya, Rabbi Yaakov Omer, mochal areu kimashke. The mochal is like mashke. That's what Rabbi Yaakov says, straight out, in this braita. Umatam amru mochal hayotze batchila tahor. So what's the reason the Chachamim said that in the first stage of pressing the olives, when the mochal comes out, it's actually tahor, which means it doesn't have the name mashke, because the owner doesn't want to keep that. He's not interested that mochal should come out at that stage. He'd rather that it doesn't come out. Therefore, it's not considered a mashke. The bailim has to want it to come for it to be a mashke. The first stage is the mochal comes out in a very, very liquidy, pure form, just like water. Therefore, it has no benefit for the bailim. Therefore, it's not called a mashke. Rabbi Shimon Omer, no, mochal eno kemashke. Mochal is not like mashke. Umat hamamu mochal yotze miikul beit habad, which is the third stage of the process. It's after the first squeezing, before the second squeezing, and they're sitting and they're just gathered in this big keli called the akal, ikul beit habad. Why is the mochal that emerges at that point tamei? Says Rabbi Shimon, if I just told you that mochal really is not a mashke, I admit to you that stage. Why? Because at that stage, there's for sure some droplets of oil that are in the mochal as well, and that's what gives it its shem mashke. But the mochal itself is not called a mashke. So it comes out that according to Rabbi Yaakov, all stages of mochal are mashke, and therefore the Mishnah in Mikvaot that said that mochal disqualifies a mikveh is after the first stage of the process, where the mochal starts to come out. Right? After the first squeezing, after the first pressing, then the mochal starts turning into Mashke according to Rabbi Yaakov, and that's what the Mishnah is speaking about. Says the Gemara, my now. What is the difference between Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Shimon? I understand Rabbi Yaakov says Mochel is Mashke, Rabbi Shimon says Mochel is not Mashke. But at the end of the day, where could you show me the difference? Everybody agrees that the first stage when it just comes out and it's pure, even Rabbi Yaakov admits that it's not Mashke, because the Bailam in the to B'kiyumam. And everyone agrees, even Rabbi Shimon that says it's not Mashke, agrees that it is Mashke at the end because it's for sure some Shemen inside of it. So where's the stage where they do argue that Rabbi Yaakov says it's Mashke and Rabbi Shimon says it's not? It means after they were pressed, they were sitting together, they were pushing against each other, and they started to really sweat up, and they were like that for a few days. Then that sweat doesn't have any oil inside it, but the owner does want it because it's much thicker than the pure liquidy, watery mochel that comes out at first. And that middle stage, that's where Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Shimon have a machloket. According to Rabbi Yaakov, the mochel is considered a mashke, and therefore it has a din of tumah, and Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold of it. So therefore, okay, now this whole understanding was in the Mishnah in Mikvaot, because we have to go according to the Manda Amr that holds that mochal is mashke in order to say a pshat to explain the Mishnah that says mochal that discolors the mikveh will disqualify it. But Rava goes like Rav Papa, who we had before the yesterday's Rav Papa, and says no, you don't have to say that Mishnah disqualifies the mikveh because it has a halachic status of mashke, but rather mishum dahavadova she'eino yisen hemena mikveh poisels a mikveh b'shinimar. Here's like Rav Papa. He says it doesn't have a din of mashke, even according to Reb Shimon. The mochal is going to disqualify the mikveh. And why? But it doesn't have a halachic status as real mashke. Says Rava, could you make a mikveh out of it? No. You can't make a mikveh out of it, and now the mikveh has an appearance of that thing, of that ingredient, which you cannot build a mikveh from. That's enough to disqualify the mikveh, and therefore you could establish that the Mishnah in Mikvaot goes even according to Rabbi Shimon, not just Rabbi Yaakov. And therefore, what really comes out is that Abaye, which was trying to explain the Rabbi Yaakov, and Rabbi that explains it according to everyone, is really arguing about the machloket before yesterday between Rav Nachman and Rav Papa. Omer Rav Yehuda Omer Shmuel. Sochet Adam eshkol shel anavim letoch hakdeira avalod letoch hake'ala. A person may squeeze a cluster of grapes into a pot, a dish, in order to enhance the dish, but not into a plate that is empty. That's what it seems to be over here. So what's the reason for that? Because if you put it into a plate, sometimes you're going to want to drink it. And therefore, we consider like you're just squeezing grapes on Shabbat. Now, you say, okay, but why are you allowed to squeeze it into a plate that has a dish? So the teretz is, because, the Rashi explains, the problem of schita on Shabbos is because you are being sechet an ingredient from within another ingredient. From let's say from oichel from psilus, like the case of the kernel, right? Extracting oichel from the peel, or mashke from oichel, like the juice inside the flesh of the grape. However, that's only when I want it for juicing. So you see that I want to juice it because now I'm going to drink this. But if I don't want to drink it, I want to eat this because I'm really going to put it into food. So then we don't consider it a mashke, and we consider it an oichel. So what are you being mafrid? Oichel mi ochel. Oichel mi ochel is like taking a piece of apple out of an apple. That's not mifarik. Mifarik is something that's encased in something else, I'm going to extract it to be its own independent thing. Now I can enjoy that thing. But if that is it's all one. So it's all one. So that's why when you squeeze it into a plate of food, it's not an issue. There's a lot of machlekes Rishonim here, exactly how to learn Shmuel and all these things, but now let's go a little weiter. From Shmuel we learn that a person is allowed to milk his goat into a pot of food, but not into a plate where it is not clear that he's going to be using the milk for food. Right? Even if he's going to use it for food, but since at this point it's into an empty plate and he could drink it, therefore we view the milk now as mashke, and that is mashke that was extracted from ochel. So the udder of a cow is meat, right? It's an ochel. Okay, so therefore a person's allowed to milk. Now what's the problem with milking? Milking is the same problem, right? It's mefarik. Now it's there's many machlokes in L'chor we say there's only mefarik by gedulei karka. Hello, good morning, Leo. There's only mefarik by gedulei karka. So there's not gedulei karka. Some say that it's considered gedulei karka because it grows because it eats from the karka. Just like we find that Meiser Sheni, you have to buy foods that grow from the ground, and one of the main thing that people bought were karbanot with the money of Maaser Sheni, which is animals, they don't grow from the ground, but the Gemara says that growing from the ground there just means that it grows from things from the ground, which is what they eat grass. So maybe for this halacha too, that's what somebody shouldn't want to say, to answer that problem. Anyways, somebody shouldn't want to say that there's other shittas that eat not from gedulei karka. Okay. But anyways, so we see that Shmuel holds that a mashke that's going to come into an ochel is an ochel. And that's why he allows you to squeeze the perot into a dish. And for the same reason, you can also milk into a dish. Ask the Gemara on Shmuel. There's a Mishnah in Taharot. Zav shecholav eta'ez hechalav tameh. The halacha is that a zav that moves something, even if he doesn't touch it, a zav is someone who sees an emission of tumah from his body. He has tumat av, and anything that he even moves without touching is tameh. So the Mishnah says that a zav that milks a goat, the milk, even though he didn't touch it, is tameh because he moved it. So it sounds like from the Mishnah that it doesn't matter where he milks it into. It doesn't say where he milked it into. Did he milk it into a dish or did he milk it into an empty plate? It doesn't say anything. So and if you tell me that mashka that's going to come into food is considered food, so when the milk goes into food, the mayit kasher. The halacha is like this: food needs to become susceptible for tumah. Mashkin, one of the 7 mashkin, they themselves, they're machshir themselves. They don't need anything to be machshir them. But if you have a loaf of bread, for example, or an apple, you need one of the 7 mashkim to go on them for them to become susceptible to become tameh. Excuse me. So now you have a zav. Oh wow, terrible. He's very tameh. And he's moving the milk. But the milk is not liquid. It's really food. Why? Because we're saying now that milk that goes into food is considered food. Grapes that you squeeze into food, you're not going to be drinking. So we don't consider that you extracted liquid from food, from the flesh of the grape, from the meat of the grape, but rather food from food. It's like cutting an apple from an apple, and it's okay on Shabbat. That's what Shmuel said. Okay? So the Gemara is asking from a story in Taharot, from a Mishnah, the Zav that squeezes milk from a goat, he's moving the milk, even though he's not touching the milk, but he's moving the milk. And moving, the Zav that moves something, if a Zav comes and he moves his table and that moves, even though he didn't touch it, it's Tameh. Zav is I don't know how, there's no word for it in English. Maybe there is, but it means the flow, which means a man that had a certain emission that came from him. We don't have it today. So he's Tameh. Similar to Keri, but it's a different liquid, he's Tameh. So now if he milks a goat, so the halacha is that the milk is Tameh. Why? He didn't touch it. He's just touching the udder. The answer is, but he moved the milk. So the Gemara says that's all nice and fine if you're talking about milk that was squeezed into a cup. So that milk is liquid, and that's one of the 7 liquids. It doesn't. So it'll become tameh. But if the milk is rendered as food, meaning if he milked it into food, right?
Directly or?
Directly. And it doesn't say that it's not talking about that case. It says whenever he milks it, including that case. So 1 second. So that milk, according to Shmuel, should be rendered as food. If it's rendered as food, then it itself has to become wet by other liquids in order for it to become susceptible to tumah. As long as that doesn't happen, you could have all the tumah touching it, it won't become tameh. So the Gemara says, how did it become susceptible? The way you say that word susceptible in Hebrew is b'mayit kashar. How did it become kosher? Because kosher doesn't mean good. Kosher means ready. How did it become ready for tumah? We have a masechet called masechet machshirin, masechet kosher. You know what it talks about? Not good things. It's not like, making things kosher. It's talking about how things become ready, susceptible for tumah. So the Gemara says, "K'da Omer Rabbi Yochanan, betipa hameluchleches al pi hadad. Hachanami, betipa hameluchleches al pi hadad." Okay, meaning there's a separate case in Kritut, and over there is a Mishnah about a lady. Now, yesterday we said that a lady's milk is mashke even shaloi l'ritzona, according to Waman the Amr, right? Or to everybody. Shaloi l'ritzona. The question was by Behemer. Rabbi Kiva said, you have a kal v'chomer, but by an isha, even if it comes out shaloi l'ritzon, she doesn't want the milk to come from her, it's still going to be tameh. That's all. But what about if the lady says, she doesn't necessarily want it to come out. She positively doesn't want it to come out. Does not want it to come out. Then it doesn't get Torat Mashke. It doesn't get the laws of being a Mashke. Okay? So, the halacha is like this. If a lady's milk just came out involuntarily, and the lady was a nida, okay? So now the milk that comes from her dripped into an oven. How it got to the oven? It got to the oven. Okay? She was standing in the oven, whatever, a little drip went in. So the halacha is that the tameh milk that comes from her is mitameh the whole tanur. Okay? So the Gemara over there wants to know exactly how in the world did this milk make the tanur tameh? So you say, what do you mean, how? Because the milk is tameh. How is the milk tameh? The Gemara asks over there, the milk should be rendered as food. Why? Because since she doesn't want it to come, she positively does not want that to happen. Why not? Because it's going to be wasted. It's going to just drip into the tanur. So she doesn't want to waste her milk. So therefore, we don't consider the milk mashke. So if it's not mashke, it's as good as oichel. If it's as good as oichel, then in order for it to become tameh, it needs to be huchshar likabel tuma. It has to become ready. So the Gemara wants to know, how did the milk become ready to be mikabel tuma? It's ochel. And the Gemara said that the Mishnah is talking about specifically batipa hameluchleches al pi hadad. By the tipa that was Rabbi Yochanan said over there, the first drip that comes from her, what happens is she uses that first drip to rub her body so that it will be easier to nurse from her. Okay? So therefore the lady is happy with the first drip. So the first drip that comes from her, which she uses, it actually has a halachic status of mashke. Now all the subsequent milk that drips from her, even though she is not happy and has a din of ochel, because it's being wasted into the oven, is all going through and touching the first drip that's on her body. And therefore, it all becomes huchshar lekabel tuma. So therefore, hachanami here too, says the Gemara like this, really we could hold like Shmuel. Shmuel's in business, Baruch Hashem. Shmuel. Therefore, Shmuel is saying that if the Hazav milks it into food, it's oichel. You asked, why should it be tamei, even though the Zav moved it, but it was never huchshul l'kabel tuma. We're speaking about a case that also, in order for the Zav to milk the goat, what he did was he used the first drip that came out he smeared it around the udder of the goat. Therefore, that first drip had a halacha like mashke. So that first drip is chalav, one of the zayin mashkim of chalav. We give it it's that status. And now all the milk, the subsequent milk that comes out, touches that. And that's why everything will become tamei. Someone who became tamei from a mate, which now he has a halachic status of an av hatuma, that squeezed grapes and olives and grapes. Kebeitza mechuvenes. Exactly a beitza. Okay, exactly one egg worth. Now, the fruits themselves, they become tamei because he's touching them. Now, the liquid that comes from out of them, tahor, and they're going to be tahor, and they're not going to become tamei through the fruits. Why? Because now, what did he do? He was not squeezing a kibetza; he was squeezing from a kibetza. How much of the olives and grapes were there? Exactly a kibetza. Let's say he had a measuring cup. He said, let's squeeze the kibetza of olives. So he takes an olive's worth of kibetza. He makes sure he displaces it. It's a kibetza. So I want to see how much liquid comes out of kibetza. So now he has a kibetza of olives. So it's tahor. Why is it tahor? Why wouldn't the liquid become tamei from the perot that they're coming out of and they're touching? The answer is because ochel, food like the olives that are tamei, cannot make other things tamei unless they are the size of an egg. Okay? So when were they the size of an egg? At the beginning, when they had all their juices inside them. But once you squeeze it out, now what's touching it? The olives that are less than a kibetza. So now the liquids cannot become tamei because they're touching fruits that are less than the right shear, less than a kibetza. Hayoter mi kibetza, says the Gemara. However, what does it sound like from this? It sounds here. It sounds from this Braita, this Mishnah, that if it will be more than a kibetza, then tamei. Okay? Why? Because the first drop that would come out of it, even if it was, let's say it was a kibetza and one drop, that's enough already. Because the first drop that comes out already becomes tamei from the kibetza. And now that drop will make everything else, all the other drops, tamei. The problem is, says the Gemara, I amrit. Mashka bala oichel oichelu. Now the Mishnah again didn't differentiate where you squeeze this into. You might have squeezed this into a pot of food. Right, to get some olive oil. You want to squeeze some olives into your food. If you tell me that mashka that comes from ochel has a halachic status of ochel, b'mayit kashar. So how are you machshir the mitz? The mitz that comes out is ochel. So the Gemara says, "Who moisav lo v'hu mefarakla." Ravina asked it and he answered it. B'seichel l'seichel ka'ara. Okay, we're not talking about such a case. We're talking about that you went straight into a ka'ara. Therefore, it has a halachic status of mashke, and it doesn't need any hechsher to be mekabel tumah. Omer Rabbi Yirmiyah. Now, for some reason, the Gemara didn't want to answer that teretz before. This is the teretz before was a better teretz. The teretz before was that even if he goes into a plate of food, but still, over there, since it was an udder, so therefore we had the Benetenes Tipa Piadad, so maybe we have to answer that. We can't answer that over here, so we have to say that the Mishnah is talking about you went into an empty plate. Omer Rabbi Yirmiyah Ketanoi. This shaila that we keep dealing with today, if mashke that comes into an ochel, habala ochel, is rendered as ochel or as mashke, is really a machloket tanoi. There's a Mishnah in Masrot, hamachlik ba'anovim. There's a baker who wants to shine up his loaves of bread with grapes. What does he do? He rubs the grapes on the loaf of bread, and all the liquid that comes out while he's rubbing it, it smooths it out. It smooths out the loaves of bread, however it works. Lo yuchsha. So the grapes are not uchsha lekabel tumah. The grapes themselves, now the grapes came into contact with their liquid. So now let the grapes be uchsha lekabel tumah. No, they're not. Why not? Rabbi Yehuda Omer Huchshar. Rabbi Yehuda says it is Huchshar. My lab, what's the machloket about? Mar Savra Mashka Bala Oichel Oichel. So since the grape juice that's coming out onto the bread is coming onto the bread, so the grape juice is not considered grape juice. It's considered bread, it's food. Therefore it's Ochel. So therefore now that the grapes are touching their liquid, they're not touching a mashke, they're touching liquid that's Ochel. So they're not, the liquid is not going to be machshir, it's not going to make them susceptible for tumah. By the way, the loaf already was kneaded in water. So that's for sure going to be huchshir. It's already huchshir. We want to know about the grapes themselves. Rabbi Yehuda says it's huchshir because he says lav ochelu. He argues with what we've been saying till now, with what we've been saying about Shmuel. He argues with Shmuel. Shmuel's going like the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda says mashke habami ochel is mashke. Doesn't matter that it's going into ochel and it's going to enhance ochel. So we don't view it as ochel. It's mashke. Omer Rav Papa, yeah, good. So the Gemara says no. The kuli alam mashke bal ochel lav ochelu. Rav Papa wants to say that everyone holds not like Shmuel. Okay. There are other girsaot in this Gemara, other Rishonim that say exactly the opposite. The Rav Papa is saying that everybody holds ochel, but we're going Rashi Taisus here. They say everybody holds not like Shmuel in this right. The hacha b'mashka b'ali ibud kamiflagi. We're speaking about liquid that is one day going to be wasted. Why? Because however this works, this smoothing with the grape juice, whatever, that you squeeze the grapes, and that makes the bread a little shiny, smooth. That is one day going to be gone. When I put that into the oven, it's going to dissipate and evaporate, and therefore, since it's going li'ibud, there's a machloket. The machloket is mar sover mashku or mar sover lav mashku. One man the Omer says, even if the mashke is not, my plan is that I'll never enjoy the mashke, because I'm not going to enjoy it, I'm not ever going to eat it. So he holds it's still a mashke. Mar sover lav mashku. Since it's going to be wasted and evaporated, I'm only using it as to shine, to squeeze, whatever it's for, That's not called a mashke, and therefore it's not going to be huchshar. That's what the Tanna Kama holds. But everyone agrees that if it's not going to go li'ibud, even if it's going to go onto food, that it has a lochic status as mashke. That's what Rav Papa says. We've looked at the Hani Tanoi, and Rav Papa says that according to this way that we explained the Mishnah, the Tanna Kama Rabbi Yehuda, we find that machloket, if mashke habal ibud is considered mashke or not, in a different breita. But you understand, we're going now, they're into a new thing. We're saying everybody holds that not like Shmuel. That's what Rav Papa is saying. Okay, now where do we find? It's a new machloket. The machloket is li'ibud. If you li'ibud is still considered a mashke, where do we find that? The Tanya, hamifatzeya bizeitim. If someone bangs the olives in order to soften them, okay? Biyadayim is to avois with dirty hands, which means normal hands. Normal hands are tamei. We had this at the beginning of Daf Yudchet, all the way back in the beginning of Shabbat. His hands are going to be tamei. Normal hands are tamei. For what? For truma, all sorts of things, and for kachim, huchsher. So now the zaytim become huchsher through the mashkim that are being flowing over there at that time. So now the zaytim that have mashkim on them from their own mashke, and then now the person's hands that are tamei are touching them. So if the zaytim are truma, they become posel, because the yadayim have a halachic status as a sheni, and now they become tamei. That's only if the reason why you were trying to soften the olives is to get out all they're very bitter. So you're trying to soften them up, to sweeten them and to make them less bitter. So then he's very, very happy with the oil that comes out of the zaytim, because the flavor becomes better. Then, and only then, does the oil that flows out of them have a halachic status as mashke. But if it's there, listoftan b'melach lahuchshar. But if the reason why he's banging them is to soften them up, so he could one day dip them into salt, right, and get them salty, because if they're too hard, then the salt won't be absorbed inside of them, lahuchshar. Then the zaytim don't become tamei from his tamei hands, because they never become huchshar lekabel tumah. Even though there's oil that's slathered all over them now, it's running through them. Since the owner is not happy, he doesn't want the oil to come out. That's not the intended purpose of banging them up. He's just trying to make them softer. He doesn't want them to get wet at all. Therefore, whatever comes out is not machshir l'kabel tumah. So the same thing is, there's another time that people bang their trees. Leida im higiu zayt of limstok in lav lo yuchshar. If a person bangs up his olives on the tree to see how fast the oil drips out of them, right? If you give a good bang to an olive on a tree, and suddenly it starts flowing oil, so you know it's ready to be pressed. So now the owner does want the oil to come out to see. There, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Huchshar. So the first man Dharma says Lo Huchshar. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Huchshar. My love, what's machloket? He does want it to come out. He does want a little oil to come out. He wants to see how fast the oil drips out, how much. So the Teretz says, my love, the Marsav Mashka Imelibid Mashku. Marsav Lav Mashku. That what the Tanna Kama holds, that Rabbi Yehuda holds, that since it's going to go the Ibud, it's still mashke. And that's why it's going to be huchsha. But the Tanna Kama holds lav mashkehu. Because since it's going le'ibud, even though he wanted to come out, that's not considered a mashke, that's going to be machshir the zaytim. Omer Avuna B'rei Rav Yeshua. Hani tanoihu. Hani tanoihu. So Rabbi Yeshua says, Hani tanoi, these tanoim that are arguing with the oil that flows out of the zaytim that get banged up, those are the way that you just explained it, Rav Papa. The hanach tanoi, but the machloket of the grape juice, when you squeeze the grapes over the kikar, over the dough that you made the loaves of bread, and you said that the machloket over there in that bright was hamachlik banovim. There was machlokes loy huchshar or Rabbi Yehuda omer huchshar, and you said that because Rabbi Yehuda holds, because even though it's going the ibud, it's huchshar. And the Tana Kama hold, if it's going the ibud, it's not huchshar. That's not that machlokes. B'mashka omer litzachzach k'miftagi. The machlokes over there is he doesn't like that. Why doesn't he like that? Because he says it's not called going le'ibud. Le'ibud means you don't get anything out. You just bang the thing on the tree to see how much oil. Okay, you want the oil to come out, but you don't want anything out of the oil. That's le'ibud. That's a nice way to explain it. But by machlik anovim, even if it's going to dissipate and evaporate, and you're not going to enjoy, let's say, eating the mashke, the grape juice, but the mashke, you want to use it for whatever purpose you just did it for. So that's not called li'ibud. So then what's the machlokes about? It's different machlokes. The mashke, Yehuda holds, that's called mashke. But the Tanna Kama says that since it's going to be tzichtzuach, it's going to be rubbed. So Rabbi Yehuda says even though it's going to be to enhance ochel, it's still called a mashke. And the Tanna Kama holds that since at first when I squeezed it out, all I wanted was to shine up the face of the bread, that's not called a mashke. But not because it's going to the ibud. Therefore it's not mashke. A person may squeeze on Shabbat a cluster of grapes into a pot, but not into an empty plate. And fish, you're allowed to squeeze to get its juices out, even into an empty plate, because fish brine is oichel mitoich oichel, and that's not mefarek. Okay? Fine. You have to know why the Gemara had to say that, because fish doesn't grow from the ground, and we say that Endi shel begdu lekarka. Fine. Yosef Rav Dimi became a lot of Hoshmaita. Amali Abaye Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi was sitting and staying over this whole thing. Abaye said to Rav Dimi, "Atum mishmeid Rav Mastisim v'leikashaduchu." You said over this memra in the name of Rav, so therefore you have no problems. But I'm not mishmeid Shmuel Mastisim v'leikashadun. We know this saying, this halachic teaching, in the name of Shmuel. Therefore, we have a big problem. Okay, Rav Dimi learned Torah from in Eretz Yisrael. He used to come down to Bavel to stay over the words of Rabbi Yirmiyahu. But they said, Abaye said, but we know this from Shmuel. And therefore we have a problem. How could you tell me that Shmuel said that you let us squeeze a fish to extract its juices inside, even into an empty plate? We learned that if a person squeezes Kvoshim sheschoton omarav legufon muter limimeyen poter aval osur. If you take pickled vegetables on Shabbat that are not yet cooked, but they were pickled, raw vegetables, and you squeeze them. So Rav says, legufon, if you're squeezing it, because they're too juicy, and they're too blown up, and they're too, you want to just mitigate the juices inside of them, and you want to make the vegetable taste better, it's too juicy, mutter, then you're allowed to do it l'chatchila. Because since you don't want the juices that are being squeezed from it, there's no iser of mefarek, according to Rav. Okay, this is not like by zaytin v'anavim, because by zaytin v'anavim, since it's the norm, you can't say, oh well, that's not juicing for juicing, because I just want to make the grape taste better and not so juicy, whatever. Let's say a guy wants that drier grape, like a raisin. That's primarily for that, so therefore it is juicing. But by these, it depends. By vegetables, if you're doing it l'tzayich gufon, so therefore we don't consider. That's not the tzura of the melacha. That's not the form of the melacha. The melacha is for juicing. To try to get the juice out to enjoy the juice. Here, you're doing it legufon. That's mutter. Lime meyen, but if you want to drink the vegetable juices, patur aval asur. You're going to be patur. Why? Because how did these vegetables get liquid inside of them? What?
You set it up.
You set it up because you pickled them. So the liquid is coming in from somewhere else. It's not in its natural form. So therefore, when you extract the liquid, it's not like, oh, I'm extracting the natural liquid which was encased. So therefore, that's not the isur of mefaret midoraita. But midirabanan, it is asur. Because if you do that, you might come to squeeze olives and grapes as well. And that's going to be an isur midoraita. So therefore, that's going to be asur midoraita. Ushlakot comes along Rav and says, shlakot means vegetables that were cooked in water. Bein legufan, bein lemeim mutter. Whether you're squeezing it to get to make the vegetable more tasty, or mehen, even if you're squeezing it to get the juices, that's going to be totally mutar.
Because it's ochel.
Yeah, just 1 second. Yeah, because it's ochel. Therefore, there's no isra at all. Shmuel Amar echad kvash ve'echad shlokas legufan muter l'mimein poter aval osir. Shmuel says, even if it's shlakot, it's only mutar if you're doing it legufan. But if you're doing it for their juices, patur aval asur. Okay, so now the liquid that's inside these vegetables that were cooked is like the brine inside the fish. Okay? Because the brine inside the fish, what's this brine? It was something outside of the fish that went into the fish when it was cooked with it, right? So why would Shmuel say that you're allowed to squeeze a fish if he said it's an Isur D'Rabbanan to squeeze the vegetables that were cooked? It's still an Isur D'Rabbanan. So Amalei, sort of Dimi answered him, right? You got the kasha? The fish brine and the cooked vegetables are one and the same. In one place, Shmuel said patur aval asur, but by the fish, he said it's mutar. Amalei ha'elikim, he swore in the name of Hashem, einai ro v'lo yizor. I have this. He quotes a pasuk over here in Eov. My eyes saw it, v'lo zor, and not a stranger. Which means, I know for a fact that I have a Kabbalah, man for man, mipumi de Rabbi Yirmiyah Shmili. I heard this from the name of from Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera, and I know that Rabbi Yirmiyah told me from Rabbi Zera, and Rabbi Zera Rav Chia Barashi, Rav Chia Barashi Rav. I can testify that it's Rav that said that you're allowed to squeeze the tear of the dog, and not Shmuel. And therefore, Shmuel would actually argue, and there's no problem. Just because you heard it in the name of Shmuel, you're making a mistake. Gufa. The Gemara goes back to this machlokes. Vashim shetzachatan. Amar Rav, the Gufa mutar l'memeim patur, aval astur, ushlakot, ben l'gufa, ben l'memeim mutar. Ushmuel amar echad zeh ve'echad zeh l'gufa mutar, l'memeim patur, aval asur. That was the machloket. So basically the machloket was, if you do it, if you have cooked vegetables, according to Shmuel, it's going to be astur midirabanan to squeeze, if you're doing it l'meimehen, to drink the juices. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, he has a third opinion. Echad kvashon echad shlochos, l'gufan mutar. L'meimehen, chayav chatat. It's isur midoraita. Okay? Because he says, even if the juices weren't there naturally, and they only came from an outside source, there's still an isur. That is the melacha. On anything, not only on zaytin va'anavim, also comes out according to Rabbi Yochanan, and even if it's other liquids that come into it, meitve. So the Gemara has a kasha on everybody. Sochatin kvashim, this is a braita. Okay, these are all amaroim. They're the earliest stage of amaroim, but yet they're amaroim. Sometimes Rav, if we have no choice, can argue with the Tana, but we don't like to do that at all. We have a braita that seems to contradict everyone. What does it say in the braita? It says, Sochtin kvashim Shabbat l'tzorech Shabbat, aval lo l'motzei Shabbat. V'zeitin v'anavim lo yischot. V'imsachat chayav chatat. You're allowed to squeeze kvashim on Shabbat for the needs of Shabbat, but not for motzei Shabbat. Now, it doesn't say what you're squeezing it for. It doesn't differentiate. L'meimeyen, l'gufon, v'zeitin v'anavim lo yischot. That you can't do at all. V'imsachat chayav chatat. But by kvashim, does it differentiate if it's l'meimeim or l'gufon? It just says you're allowed to squeeze it. So it's clear that you're allowed to squeeze kvashim even for the juices. Kasha l'Rav, kasha l'Shmuel, v'kasha l'Rabbi Yochanan. Everybody said that you're not allowed to squeeze pickled vegetables for the juices. So Rav retaretz tamei, Shmuel retaretz tamei, Rabbi Yochanan retaretz tamei. Everybody is going to answer the Bryce according to his own way. Rav retaretz tamei, how? He says, you know what that means? He's going to say that the Braita is not speaking about all cases. Even though it doesn't differentiate, he's going to tell you that it is differentiating. But ushlakot bein legufan bein lememein mutar. V'zeitiv lo yischot v'imsachtan chayav chatat. Okay? That's how he's going to read the Braita. Okay? Shmuel's going to say, it means shlakot also. Basically, everybody's going to read the Braita in the way that that's legufon. But if you squeeze naaseh k'misha schad zaitin v'anavim v'chayav chatat. But if you're doing it l'meimeyan and you do it, even though it's mashma in the Braita, in a simple reading of the Braita, that it says don't do it, and then it says zaitin v'anavim, he reads it as one. If you do it, it's like zaitin v'anavim that you're not allowed to do, and you're going to be chayav chatat. Amar Rav Chia Barashi, Amar Rav Dvar Torah ina chayav aladris es zaitin v'anavim bilvat. Really, midoraisa, you're not chayiv chatat in the name of Rav, unless you step on the zayt v'anov, because they're normally pressed. But all other fruits and vegetables, since they're not normally pressed, squeezing their juices is not considered a malacha. V'chein toni devei menashe. Okay, so basically, all other perot, what does Rav say? All other perot, since they're not normally pressed, so the juices are like oichel, and there's no real isser. It's not going to be isser, there's only going to be isser on zaitim, vanavim, and he's going to be moided that there's an isser midirabanan, for sure, on tutim v'rimonim, because there are some people that do that. We already had that in the Bryce. That's the only isser midoraita. What about if you find a new fruit that everybody now squeezes? Maybe then Rav will be moided that since the whole world is squeezing that fruit, so maybe the ein eid mi pi eid kosher. Then the Braita says something in the Bei Menashe, something that is seemingly unrelated. An aid that heard testimony from another aid is not kosher for edut. El edut kshe isha bilvad. Only to be matter a woman to get married if one aid heard from another aid that her husband died. So then the Chachamim were makel to rely on this edut so that the lady shouldn't stay in Agunah forever. Okay? And that the way it works is, even though they're not allowed to be oiker dovim in Torah, if it's not really edut, how can they just accept the edut? What do you mean? We're going to be lenient over here. If it's not edut min Torah, how could you be? You're letting the isha eshet ish. So what happens is Rashi says v'kol de mekadesh adaita de rabbana mekadesh, the famous Gemara all over, because what they do is they uproot the initial kedushin. If we hear edut, aid mi pi aid, that this lady's husband died, then her original marriage with him, when he gave her money, we take away the kedushin because he said kedat Moshe Yisrael, and we're not happy with it. So initially she was never married, therefore she could remarry. That's the way they do it. Okay? It's not our sugin, so we're going to go weiter. Iboilu aid mi pi aid le edus bechor mahu. Can you accept edus that heard from other edus that the halacha is that if a bechor has a mum, and the mum was placed by a person, was done by a person, the Chachamim made a knas, and they said you're not allowed to eat it. Normally, if there's a mum, now the Kohen doesn't have to bring it to the Beit HaMikdash, and he can eat it as chulin. So the question is, we don't know how this mum came about. So we have edut, the name of another aid, that he heard from another aid that it happened by itself. Rav Ami Osiv Rav Asi Shori. It's a machloket. Amalei Rav Ami le Rav Asi. V'atonim de Bei Menashe ein eid mi eid kosher edus isha b'vad. So why would you say this is also an exception? So he says eimel leedus she'isha ksheru lo bilvad. Okay, it doesn't mean leedus isha for an isha to get remarried. It means the only type of edus that will accept eid mi pi eid is an edut that an isha is allowed to be made. An isha is allowed to be made about a bechor because it's isurin. Okay, I really have to go. That's the problem. Get to the Mishnah. Okay, so and therefore the isha, since it's a surim, the isha is allowed to be made about the bechor. Therefore, that's how Rav Asi understood the Braita. And therefore, you could accept Eid Mipi Eid. Rav Yemer Achshe Eid Mipi Eid l'Bechor. Kori le Miremer, and Miremer said about his friend Rav Yemer, a disgraceful thing. He said, Yemer Shori Buchra. Yemer is Mate Bechorot. Like he was not happy with it. V'hilchata Eid Mipi Eid Kasher l'Bechor. But we paskin, like Rav Asi and like Rav Yemer, that it is mutar. Chalot Dvash. Let's go back to our Mishnah. It said in our Mishnah that if you have honeycombs that you already took off the hive, they were already taken off the hive, and you crush them on Erev Shabbat, and the honey is flowing. So the honey is also ba'achila on that Shabbat, and Rabbi Elazar is matir. There was a last halacha in the Mishnah So therefore, now why isn't there an Issur D'Rabbanan? If I drink the honey, I'm going to come to get more honey. The answer is people normally didn't squeeze out honey once it was flowing out. So therefore, it was already crushed and it's flowing out. People didn't do more. So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says it's mutter. Chachamim were worried that if you drink this one, then you'll drink the next time when it flows out, when it's not crushed. And that will cause people to come to crush it. So ki atar of Hoshia min ado osav ha'aisim asnisa biyodeh. When Hoshia came from Nardo, he came with a braita. And what did he come with? Zaytin v'anov shiritzka me'erev Shabbat v'yatzu me'atzman. And now they're flowing from themselves, like the Mishnah. Asturin, Rabbi Elazar v'Rabbi Shimon matirin. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say mutar. When Rav Yosef heard this, Rav Yosef Gavi Yisei Osla Ashminon. Thank you very much. What have you said in this braita more than our Mishnah? What is one thing? There's only one thing that's different than our Mishnah. That's not just Rabbi Elazar, but it's also Rabbi Shimon. Okay? Now, you're going to say, wait, the braita is talking about Zaytim v'anavim. And our Mishnah is talking about honey. So, the Mefarshim said there's no real difference. Okay? Therefore, Rabbi Yosef is asking, what in the world have you added? All you added is a name. Rabbi Shimon, Amalei Abaya, Tuva Kamashmalon. The Imi Masechet Hava Mina Hosam Hu, the Mikar Uchla V'B'Seif Uchla. Because there, the honey before it came out was Ochel. And now that it comes out, it's still Ochel. That's why Rabbi Elazar says it's mutar. Because there's no Issur Schita. Because Ochel, Aval Hacha, the Mikar Uchla V'B'Seif Mashke. But here, that the juice, before it comes out, is Ochel. And now it's going to be Mashke. So there's going to be a real problem of Schita. Eimaloi. So maybe Rabbi Elazar will not allow you to drink from the liquids that float out on Shabbat, because maybe he'll come to squeeze it. Kamash Malon. Therefore, the Chiddush is that even there, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon are going to be matir, and they don't hold as an Issur at all to drink even from Zaytim v'anavim that flowed out. So they're arguing even on the first cases in the Mishnah. Okay, Chazak Baruch.